Back to MCQs, we have a question which says, the diagram shows some stages during the asexual reproduction of a single-celled organism. It shows stages labeled V, W, X, Y, and Z, and asks, which row shows the relative amounts of DNA in each of the cell stages. So now, this question is about binary fission, which is a type of asexual reproduction. We need to follow how the amount of DNA changes as the cell prepares to divide and then splits into two daughter cells. As we look here, the parent cell at stage V starts with a normal amount of DNA, which we take as 1. Then in stage W, the DNA starts to replicate, so the amount doubles to 2. In stage 10, the cell is preparing to divide and still contains the doubled DNA, so it remains 2. After division, in stages Y and Z, the DNA is equally shared between the two new cells, so each one has 1 again. So, the correct answer is C. V contains 1 DNA molecule, while W has 2. X also has 2 DNA molecules, and after nuclear division, 2 new cells, Y and Z, are formed, each with its own separate single nucleus. This means that during binary fission, DNA first doubles before division and is then equally distributed so that each daughter cell has the same amount of DNA as the original parent cell. Next, it says, asexual reproduction involves the cell cycle in which the cell divides and then growth and DNA synthesis take place before the cell is ready to divide again. The diagram shows the stages in one complete cell cycle and tells us that the cycle takes 1.75 hours to complete. Using the diagram, which activity in the cycle takes 52.5 minutes in total. The diagram shows one complete cell cycle and indicates that the cycle takes 1.75 hours. First, we convert the total time into minutes and then relate the diagram's parts to time. The total time is 1.75 hours, but we need our answer in minutes, so we have to convert 1.75 hours into minutes first, and for this conversion, we will simply multiply 1.75 with 60, and we will get 105 minutes. So, the full circle takes 105 minutes to complete. Now, you can see that the diagram is divided into 16 equal parts, so dividing 105 minutes by 16 shows that each part represents 6.5625 minutes. This means one segment equals to 6.56 minutes. Now, let's check how many segments each activity takes. For cell growth, it appears in 2 sections, one with 3 parts and another with 5 parts, making a total of 8 parts, and we know one part equals 6.56 minutes, so by multiplying 8 by 6.56 gives us 52.5 minutes, which is the required answer. This means cell growth takes up half of the total cycle time, that is 52.5 minutes out of 105 minutes. We can check the other options as well. For cytoplasm division, it occupies only one section, so multiplying 1 by 6.56 gives 6.56 minutes. Nucleus division takes 2 sections, and multiplying 2 by 6.56 gives 13.12 minutes. DNA synthesis covers 5 segments, and multiplying 5 by 6.56 gives approximately 32 minutes. Therefore, out of all the options, the correct answer is option A. Now, let's look at the next question. It asks which diagram matches each type of flower with its features. Now, what we'll do is go through each option one by one and check which one actually makes sense biologically. Starting with option A, this one is incorrect. It matches insect-pollinated flowers with anthers that are loosely attached. That doesn't make sense because if the anthers are loose and exposed, the pollen would just blow away with the wind before any insect could reach it. Also, it matches wind-pollinated flowers with a small sticky stigma, which is not suitable because wind pollination requires a larger surface area to catch pollen from the air. Moving on to option B, this is also incorrect. Here, insect-pollinated flowers are linked with smooth, light pollen. That's not right because smooth and light pollen is meant for wind dispersal. Insect-pollinated flowers actually produce sticky or spiky pollen so it can attach to insects like bees or butterflies. Now, let's consider option C, which is the correct one. This diagram matches everything properly. Insect-pollinated flowers are shown with small sticky stigmas and short filaments, which ensures that when an insect enters the flower, it comes into direct contact with the reproductive parts. On the other hand, wind-pollinated flowers are shown with loosely attached anthers, large feathery stigmas, and smooth, light pollen, all of which are perfect adaptations for catching and spreading pollen through the air. Finally, option D is incorrect. It matches wind-pollinated flowers with short filaments, which doesn't work. For wind pollination, the stamens usually need to be long and extend bahara so that the wind can easily carry the pollen away. Short filaments would keep the pollen trapped inside the flower. So, the correct answer is option C. Insect-pollinated flowers are designed to attract insects and ensure pollen sticks to them, while wind-pollinated flowers are adapted to release and capture pollen carried by the wind. Now, let's move on to the next question, which asks about the sequence of organs that a sperm cell must pass through in order to fertilize an egg cell. To answer this, we need to think about the journey of the sperm starting from the male body and continuing into the female reproductive system. The correct pathway is given in option B. In this sequence, sperm first travels through the sperm duct and then through the urethra. After entering the female body, it passes through the vagina, then the cervix, moves into the uterus, and finally reaches the oviduct, where fertilization typically takes place. Therefore, option B is the correct answer. Now, let's move on to the next question, which focuses on the changes in the thickness of the uterus lining during the menstrual cycle and asks us to identify when a woman is most likely to be fertile. Using the diagram, we can understand how the lining changes over a typical 28-day cycle and how this relates to fertility. First, looking at the graph, phase at days 5 to 14 shows the uterus lining starting to build up again under the influence of hormones, preparing the body for a possible pregnancy. During this stage, fertility is increasing because the reproductive system is getting ready for ovulation. Next, phase B day 14 represents the peak of the cycle, where ovulation usually occurs. At this point, an egg is released from the ovary, making this the time when fertility is at its highest. The uterus lining is also well developed, creating ideal conditions for fertilization. Then, phase C days 14 to 28 shows the uterus lining remaining thick in case fertilization occurs. However, if the egg is not fertilized, the lining will begin to break down towards the end of this phase, leading back to menstruation. Fertility gradually decreases during this stage. Finally, phase D days 0 to 5 represents menstruation. At this point, the uterus lining is at its thinnest because it has just been shed. This is a phase of very low fertility, as no egg is available for fertilization. So, in summary, fertility is low in phase D, increases in phase A, reaches its highest point in phase B during ovulation, and then decreases again in phase C. Therefore, the correct answer is B. Next, we have the question, which statements about meiosis are correct? To understand this question, we need to focus on the two main features of meiosis, whether it produces genetically identical nuclei and whether it produces haploid nuclei. First, meiosis does not produce genetically identical nuclei. Unlike mitosis, which produces identical copies for growth and repair, meiosis is responsible for producing genetic variation. This happens through processes such as crossing over and independent assortment, where genetic material is exchanged and shuffled. As a result, each gamete formed is genetically different, so the statement that meiosis produces genetically identical nuclei is incorrect. Second, meiosis does produce haploid nuclei. It is called reduction division because it reduces the chromosome number by half. It begins with a diploid cell containing two sets of chromosomes and ends with haploid cells containing a single set. This is important for sexual reproduction because when two gametes fuse during fertilization, the full diploid chromosome number is restored. So, the statement that meiosis produces haploid nuclei is correct. Therefore, when we combine both statements, the correct option is the one where the first statement is false and the second statement is true. Hence, the correct answer is B. Next, the question asks about a feature of asexual reproduction in plants. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent and does not use gametes. It also does not involve meiosis, instead, it occurs through mitosis, producing genetically identical offspring. Therefore, the correct answer is D, which states that it uses cell division by mitosis. Moving on to the experiment with seeds, the students are testing whether a chemical in the tester prevents germination. The results show that only the seeds without testers germinated, while those with testers or placed near testers did not. The most logical next step is to check whether the chemical from the tester is dissolving into the water and affecting germination. This can be tested by changing the water daily in group 3 to remove any chemicals. Hence, the correct answer is A. The next question is about hormone levels during the menstrual cycle. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, peaks around ovulation, which occurs near the middle of the cycle, around day 14. Progesterone, on the other hand, reaches its highest levels after ovulation, during the luteal phase, around days 19 to 23. The option that correctly matches these timings is B, so that is the correct answer. Finally, the question about the umbilical cord asks about the composition of blood in the umbilical artery. Blood flowing from the fetus to the placenta carries waste products, including carbon dioxide, which need to be removed. Therefore, the umbilical artery has a higher concentration of carbon dioxide compared to the umbilical vein. This makes A, the correct answer.